In the last episode, we all realized that we were being watched after Dan and the rest of us had discovered buried treasure, the hatchet. Was it a coincidence? We decided that it was nothing more than coincidence that the men started visiting us most every night. Little did we know that we had upset a balance of birthright and order of immense power that would change the lives of 4 teenagers forever. We stayed in the village for another week before voting that we should start heading back. Fred had become increasingly adamant about heading home. He was scared of the man and thought we should start for home before something happened. The rest of us figured he was just young and probably should not be so far away from home, and he missed his mom and dad. After all, he had just turned 13 the month before. When asked what he thought might happen, he just shrugged his shoulders and walked away. We woke on the day of leaving to a rainstorm, the kind that just kept raining without letting up for about 3 hours. But we had all trained to go prepared for bad weather. We got our rain gear and started loading up the pack horses and prepared to leave as soon as the rain let up a little. Dan put the hatchet back in his protective covering and put it back in the iron box and tied it securely to his pack horse. Finally, the rain let up enough for us to see where we were going, and we headed out. The first few hours was easy going, and we started to have some fun and relax a little. Fred had become more and more quiet and would sit by himself when we stopped for a break. We tried to talk to him, but he just looked at us and with a half grin and say he was okay. The rain had stopped. Rained off and on all day, but it was getting very cold as the night came closer. We decided to push on for a little while after dark, until it was impossible to see our way. We found a place to stop for the night in a little clearing. We set up camp and started a supper fire and settled in for the night. It was my turn to do what dishes we used, and gathered them all up and found the little stream that was close by. Fred came with me, and he sat on a rock and watched all around. He said he was getting tired of pancakes and wanted some fresh meat. He knew there was game in the area and wanted to bag a deer or something, which seemed a little unusual as Fred never wanted to kill anything. We woke the next morning and started to get ready to head out again. We started a little fire for eggs and pancakes. Fred groaned through the whole thing, but ate it anyway as he knew there would be nothing else until later that day when we stopped to eat again. Just then Fred became very excited and pointed into the trees. He whispered, "Something is in there." Mike grabbed the .30-06 and took careful aim. Bang! Got him. Dropped him right where he stood, he shouted. He was the best shot of all of us put together. We all went to see the 6-point buck. Fred got his wish for dinner that night. We cleaned and dressed him out right there, packed him up in salt, and started out. It stopped raining, and we thought we would be home that night. An hour went by, and we started to notice familiar sights. However, we had been there before. After the argument Dan and Mike had about never trusting your sight, but to put full trust in a compass, we had been walking in circles. We knew if we just headed due south, we would end up somewhere close to the little town of Afton. Our dreams had been shattered about getting home that night. That night, after we cooked some of the venison and settled in again for another night, the conversation turned to the Indian brave we'd seen in the village. We had not seen him again, which only affirmed that what we saw didn't really happen. We all turned and found our tents and went to bed with the hope that we would never see him again, and would be very close to home by nightfall the next day. It was almost 2 a.m., and Mike started shouting and banging on anything he could find. "Grizzly, grizzly," he shouted over and over. The rest of us came piling out of our tents, still in our underwear, with pots and pans in hand. I looked at the tree that we climbed to hang the fresh meat as high as we could get it, and it was still there. What I saw next is something that I will never forget for as long as I live. The bear attacked one of the pack horses. I had never seen anything like that before. Somehow the horse had got his reins tangled up and could not get away. The bear knocked him on his feet and killed it right in front of our eyes. We knew not to disturb the bear at this point, as we could have been killed as well. A 500-pound grizzly in attack mode is something you never disturb. Just get away and leave him be. He ate his fill and left. Shortly after that, as we were burying the remains of the horse, the Indian brave appeared again, just on the edge of the woods where the grizzly returned to go away. We packed what we could and left immediately and never looked back. We arrived back home at only 2 miles to the east of Afton and found our way home. All the while, Fred had begun to talk to himself as though he saw someone that was not there. We guessed that the final blow to him was being scared out of his wits, and he lost his mind. The family institutionalized him, and he stayed there. Well, being treated by his doctors, he escaped one night, and we never heard from him again. They say he went back to the mountain and died up there somewhere. But you know, small towns and the stories we concoct. Dan kept the hatchet and placed it on the mantel above the fireplace. He never tried to sell it or place it in a museum, and he never told anyone how he ended up with it and the things that happened. One by one, the family there had been hit by a string of bad luck. Uncle Boyd lost the farm. No crops would live long enough to take to market. Mike moved away and started a family. Last I heard, he had a heart attack and died. He was only 22 years old. While walking home from the bar one night, Dan was hit by a car and was killed instantly. The woman that hit him never recovered. She kept saying she saw what looked like an Indian brave standing in the middle of the road, and she couldn't stop. Sometime later, I went back to the town to visit and see some old friends. While I was sitting in an old cowboy bar with some of those friends, I got up to use the bathroom. While I was in there, a very old man, he was obviously Indian, stood behind me. At first, I thought he was just waiting his turn, but something was very familiar about his appearance. I'd seen this man before. Just as I walked out of the restroom, he said to me, "Return what you have that does not belong to you." I almost passed out, and I went and sat down with my friends and asked them if someone followed me in there. They said no, they had not noticed. The very next morning, to the old farm that had been abandoned, and found the hatchet and the iron box. I bought a horse and headed back to the village at the top of the mountain. I found the stream and found the shovel that was left there by mistake and buried the thing again in as close to where it came from. When I was finished, I heard that same noise I heard before. I stood, and when I turned around, there he was, just standing behind me watching, only this time he was in full headdress. He was wearing the skin from the deer we killed on the mountain that day. I know this. I saw the marking of Mike's initials carved in it on his hindquarters. He smiled ever so slightly and whispered, "Now I can rest again," and slowly faded away.